Why does society want us to be coupled up so desperately?
Well,
are there any other myths about marriage?
Another myth that I think people think about a lot.
Do we all need someone to go through life with? What are your best tips for becoming comfortable with our solitude?
Oh, okay. So I love this tool.
We're definitely less happy than single people.
And had worse health outcomes, too.
Okay, so tell me about that. What do you draw from the data?
Hello, friends, and welcome to the Liz Moody podcast. I am hugely interested in relationships and marriage and the way that both have evolved over time and the way that the relationships we pursue are so intricately connected with the stories that we tell ourselves about what it means to live a good life. So many of us have this idea that life is filled with these milestones. Graduate college, get a job, find a partner, get married, have kids. And more we're questioning, are these the right choices or are we following them because of societal shoulds? Are there other choices that might make us happier, more fulfilled, more satisfied in this one precious and wild life that we have? Enter Meghan Keane. Meghan is a podcast powerhouse. She's a founding producer of Ted's Radio Hour. She's a producer at Invisibilia, and she's the founder and producer of Life Kit. She's also the author of the recently released Party of One, Be Your Own Best Partner, which dives into the myths of marriage and explores the much under-discussed benefits of being single. And interestingly, she's now in a long-term relationship herself. We'll talk about that later in the episode. But we will talk about how her embracing of singleness hugely benefited that partnership and can benefit any of us in partnerships. This episode is truly for all of us, whether we are single or in relationships, because a key to a satisfying life is feeling like we have real options. The option to stay single and enjoy it, the option to leave our relationships, or the option to stay in the relationship knowing it's a choice, which makes you appreciate it all the more. One life isn't a runner-up for another. This is our one go-around on this planet, and it is so much shorter than we think. This episode will help you make the most of it.
Meghan, welcome to the podcast.
Liz, thanks so much for having me.
We're going to get into some really fun subjects today, things that I just think people should be talking about a lot more. So let's start with our societal obsession with marriage and partnership is so deeply ingrained that I think so many of us don't even step back to question it as a norm. Can you tell us a little bit about where that comes from?
Sure, absolutely. I'm a millennial. I'm 35. I thought I was above all of that social conditioning. I grew up with the Disney princesses, and I was like, those are fun to watch, but I know I don't want to be a princess, right? And I thought I was like, this feminist who didn't need a man or anything like that. But then the more I was dating and getting to my 20s and then to my 30s, I was like, oh, these external messages about putting marriage, especially on a pedestal, were still seeping into my brain. A big way it's happened in the United States especially is this idea of that marriage is this be-all, end-all of the best type of connection you can have. Our society is so built on this idea that people should couple up, have children, go to the suburbs. And that's just not the best way for everyone to live. The messaging is so strong from a young age, right, where we're told like, well, when you get married, right? It's like assumed, right? At a bigger, like more systemic level, you're rewarded for getting married, right? With taxes, healthcare, housing. So there's all these signals, big and small, that are telling you should get coupled up. And even just if you're single and around a lot of friends who are coupled, you're hearing about their plans and you're hearing about we're doing this or we're going to do that, and you feel a little bit on the outside. So of course you're conditioned to think, well, I have to be in on this club, right? I don't want to be out on the cold. So it really comes at us from all these different places.
And why is that? Like, why does society want us to be coupled up so desperately?
Well, there's like political and economic reasons for that. I think, especially in America, it keeps like a real class order.
Wait, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, it maintains wealth, right, within families.
Which is sort of where marriage came from originally, right?
Exactly, yeah. It was a means of transferring power and money, right? Like, on a large country level where, royalty would marry into other royalty, but also like on a much more everyday level with farmers, right? Like you have a farm and my family has a farm. Let's combine resources and make this happen. It's interesting. I was talking with Stephanie Kuntz, who's this historian who studies marriage. And in America, especially around the Victorian era and like the industrial age, people started to get this idea that they could marry for love. And that was kind of novel because before, like we were talking about, like you had to kind of couple up as a means to survive and have an economic safety, right? And then as more and more people started to be able to make wages on their own, right? Like leaving the family business or the family farm, also combined with the Enlightenment age and free thinking, didn't hurt that Pride and Prejudice had come out in the era before. And so pop culture was also infiltrating, like, what if you married for love? That became to really capture a lot of Americans' ideas about what marriage could be next. But then it still also, of course, came with this economic benefit. The Victorian era, it's not like this huge feminist time where then everyone was marrying for love and, everyone was so like actualized. But, in reality, there is this real privatization also happening in Victorian America where we were celebrating out more in the streets and our communities for holidays and stuff. And all of a sudden that was becoming more privatized and brought into the home. And so if you weren't married, you were quite literally like out on the cold, right? In like a holiday situation or what have you. It's this combination of, it's always been like an economic security blanket for a lot of people, mostly women, right, throughout history. But then it also became don't you want to feel more actualized? You want to feel like this is the right type of love that's going to keep you warm and keep you stable.
It's interesting because there was that shift, like marriage from business to marriage for love. And that was because of a lot of economic factors, like you just said, and all these things. And I almost feel like because of economic factors and societal shifts now, there's a shift going on where women are like, do I need men at all? Like, is this making my life better or is this making my life worse? Because, in the 70s, we were started to be able to get credit cards. We have like a level of economic independence that we've never had before. We have a level of reproductive independence that we've never had before. And so I think that people are questioning, well, what role does this thing serve in my life now in a way that they never have before?
Yeah, completely. And I think it's a wonderful thing because so much of what I learned writing this book was slowing down all of your own thought processes about what are my actual values? What do I actually want? Not just what I think I want. Because if you start to unravel that, you can think, okay, actually, I do want to be more single or single for longer stretches of time or not partnered. Or actually, I do want partnership, but it's going to look different than the way that I've been told partnership should look. And it's interesting to me because, again, I thought I was like above all this, but I was told at a very young age that like traditional marriage, right, quote unquote, traditional marriage in America was kind of like the way it's always been. But the reality is that was a total speed bump made by economic reality after World War II, where there was really high wages, so you could have one breadwinner in the home. Someone could stay home and take care of the kids. And that has obviously changed, right? Child rearing is incredibly expensive in America. Most parents do have to work. This idea that we had to be coupled up in this specific way was also a blip in the timeline of marriage. And yet people are still beholden to that idea. But you're right. I do think that once you stop and think, actually, I got my own credit card. Maybe I own my own house already. A lot of people, especially women, are thinking maybe I can actually unplug from this marriage matrix and think about what I actually want before I make a decision.
I tried to dive into the data around being married versus single in terms of happiness levels, and it's kind
of all over the place.
Yeah, it's really hard to draw conclusions from. It seems to me like married people are slightly happier, but that seems to also be because happier people end up married. And so they're like, were these people happier before and then they just happened to get married? Or did marriage make them happier? It seems to be the former a little bit. Also, it seemed like people in unhappy marriages were definitely less happy than single people.
And had worse health outcomes, too.
Okay, so tell me about that. What do you draw from the data?
It's hard to be like, who's happier and who's not, right? Because it's so individualized. But I think what we can all agree upon is that if you're in an unhappy marriage, you're not going to be happy, right? And so the idea of just default into any relationship, my mom always says man at any cost kind of mindset is going to lead you to these relationships that are going to be stressful. And then we know stress causes poor health outcomes, right? I mean, the thing that I always look to is that single people, the research shows, often have more social ties. And we know that social ties of all different types of connection levels, not just marriage, are super important to our health and happiness.
They're the most important thing.
Exactly.
Everybody listening is sitting there because I talk about the Harvard School of Adult Development study all the fucking time.
Yeah.
And everybody's listening is like, okay, Liz, we know. But I feel proud if I've amplified anything into the world. It's this one study. So I know everybody listening is like, yay, we know that.
But it's so important. When I read that study, I see marriage is not singled out as the type of connection that is the most protective for your health and happiness. The leader of the study talks about how it is your mentors, your weak ties. your acquaintances, all of this builds up. I just want to also shout it from the rooftops because it is so in conflict with this idea that you have to have one person be your be all end all kind of relationship. When the reality is that I think single people know that they have to have a diverse set of connections. And why aren't we all looking to that and being like, that's what we all need, right? That's what we all need to go for a happier, healthier life.
That was something I kept thinking about as I read your book is, do we all need someone to go through life with, whether that's a friend, a family member, a partner? Like, do we need somebody who, when it's the middle of the night and we need to go to the hospital, is going to drop everything for us when we're going through a depression that lasts months and months and months? Like, do we need a person and we're just saying that should be a partner too much? Or do you think we actually don't really need a person in any way?
No, I totally think you need your person, right?
Okay.
I think you're totally right. All those things you mentioned are things that are not inherently romantic. It's funny to me that we associate so many things that are not romantic or sexual or anything like that you reserve typically for a marriage. But those are things that anyone could do, right? Technically. Anyone can be your emergency contact. Anyone can be someone who helps you in a really hard time. You don't have to have a romantic partnership. But we need other people. Some people come to me and will be like, I love your book. I love the message of singleness, but I still really want a partner. And they're almost ashamed to say that. If I'm going to be like, that's not, we didn't read the book or anything. I'm like, that was me. You want connection. You're a human. That is okay. Just kind of diversifying how you think about how you get that love and attention and affection and deepness with people is only going to open and deepen your life more than creating this very narrow path about how to get that type of connection.
Well, that was a bit of data that jumped out to me from your book, was that if you are single, the more that you want a partner, the less happy you're going to be.
I know.
How do we combat that?
So there's this interesting idea about obsessive passion versus harmonious passion. This is different from that research you're mentioning, but I think they kind of link together. If you are obsessed with this one outcome, right? This idea that if you want to get married or have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, right, or a partner, and that's the only thing that's going to make you happy, well, automatically pass fail there, right? You either are going to be in that relationship or you're not. And that is, I think, a really unkind way to go through life. And instead, this idea of obsessive passion tells us it's just that, right? It's you are compulsively engaging in an activity. So like dating and trying to just do endless swiping, playing the quote unquote numbers game. That's your sole focus. You are going to burn out. And I think everyone here who's ever been on a dating app for 5 seconds is nodding their heads. On the opposite side is this idea of harmonious passion, meaning you are not as attached to the outcome of engaging in a behavior with this passion. It's kind of a take it or leave it kind of mindset. This is not the sole focus of your life. You willingly engage with it and then can disconnect it from it because you have a lot of other stuff happening. So I think why I'm so big about thinking about friendships, right? Hobbies, how to talk to yourself in your own brain about what's the reality of actually happening with dating. It's all in service of helping widen your focus and seeing that the partnership is not the one way to get to happiness, right? That opening the focus is the way that's going to actually not just make you calmer, but feel like your life is bigger too.
What are practical ways that we can do that?
I am a big fan of mindfulness. And the way I think about it is mindfulness is just paying attention to the moment without judgment, right? And the way you can apply it to this context is, let's say if you're single and you're upset about it. Also, I know that's not everyone. Some people are probably like, you don't have to tell me twice, I love singleness. But if you are feeling that frustration, if you are noticing that you're feeling frustrated and sad, stop, pay attention to your body, notice how it feels, and then just label the emotion instead of putting on what's called a secondary emotion, which is usually shame. I'm feeling sad because no one's going to love me, or all these kind of catastrophic thoughts, right? Instead of going down that path, be like, I'm just noticing how I'm feeling. I'm noticing sadness. And even just I've heard Joseph Goldstein, who's a meditation master, talk about this. Don't even put I am sometimes in front of it. Just be like, sadness. Just I'm just feeling the emotion and processing the emotion rather than creating a whole story about it. Because I think that's something that really takes people down a path where rumination can just you just spin out. And oftentimes, and I'm this person too, we think that rumination is the way you're going to solve a problem, right? If you could just think about this for an hour more, you're going to crack it. But the reality is to not actually focus on the problem. It's to take a mental off ramp. So instead of having Why do I feel that? Like, why can't I meet anyone? Why can't I do this? Why is this my life? Those questions just make you spin out, right? So what's actually more beneficial is saying, what can I do right now to make myself feel better? What's going to feel nourishing? What's a connection I can reach out to? It's not solving or answering any of those big questions that you're putting forth, but that's kind of not the point. You actually just want to distract yourself and then stop the rumination, because we know rumination is emotionally and physically taxing, and it causes a lot of stress on your body. And these are a lot of like in the moment techniques to just take you out of the spinning. But the more you do it, it's like a groove that really, adds up to a positive base of emotion.
You talk about rumination. You also talk in your book about co-rumination.
Yes, venting.
Mm-hmm. Venting is not helpful, you say. Can you tell us why?
Yeah. So venting, we know and we love it, right? We all think about it as a way to like connect with friends, right? Here's this crazy thing that happened to me. I want to tell someone about it. You want to feel validated, right? And I'm not saying don't vent. I'm saying know when it's time to turn away from venting into a more perspective-taking stage. This is an idea that comes from psychologist Ethan Kross, who I interviewed for the book, and he calls venting co-rumination. So, and that way I found it pretty damning. But he was saying like how once you get to a certain point in the venting, be like, okay, let's pause. Like, are you ready to move on? I'm a big fan of asking a friend, do you want validation or do you want advice? And that can usually tell me if someone's ready to make the pivot or not. Sometimes people do just need a little bit more validation. If they're ready for advice, it's not to say, well, you should do this or that. It's more like, hey, I know you've gone through this before. I know you can get through this. Like, it's kind of like advice in the form of like perspective taking. So Ethan Kross also talks about this interesting study. I believe he did this idea of the power of perspective taking, where he told people to think about, I believe it was a problem, and for some people to think about the problem as themselves, but then another group to think about it as if they were a fly on the wall, looking down at the problem. And the people who were the flies on the wall, thinking of themselves as that, they were better able to like process the emotion in a more productive way than the people who were kind of internalizing it. Venting is just a way that it keeps you a little stuck, and it can also burn out your friends or your family. I know I've done that to my mom, where I would call about the same problem. She'd be like, kind of throw her hands up, after a while. I'm like, I get it. I come with the same problem. For yourself or for another friend, if you are able to move to that more perspective-taking stage and give kind of like validation that like, hey, you've been through this before. I know you can do it. The classic, that sounds really hard, but think about how you're going to think about this in a year. Like you probably won't even remember this happened, right? Different things work for different people, right? But the point is to get out of the venting. You're kind of just getting worked up, right? And to move to a perspective-taking stage.
What can people who are married or in long-term relationships say that's helpful for their single friends?
Yes, totally. So my number one big rule I have for married and partnered people with their single friends is don't treat their single life and dating life as entertainment. Don't grab the phone and be like, oh, I was never on Tinder. Like, let me swipe through, right?
Oh my God. Okay.
Did I just call you out?
Yeah.
Well, look, some people are amenable to it. I find a lot of people aren't.
Well, no, and I take it a step. I'm like, I'd be really good at this.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. So so my next rule is like, if your single friend is saying like, do you know anybody that you can set me up with? Like, can you look at my profile? I don't engage in it unless people bring it to me.
Okay.
And from there, I don't assume I know what is best for that person's dating life, because the reality is that when people meet, it's just like luck and timing a lot of the times. It's not because you were a fully formed person and you got some degree in being an amazing person. Like a lot of people get into relationships and don't do any self-actualization. I think we say it all the time. So I would say for married people, be really interested too in your single friends' hobbies. Celebrate their accomplishments. Make sure you're inviting them to your life. And then don't always show up as the couple. Like, I know, sometimes that's just the reality of how couples work, especially if they have kids. But try to give that single friend, one-on-one time as well. Watch their dog when they go out of town. These little things that we reserve for partners, but single people love and would love for a married friend to help with something that's very practical as well.
I've been to many doctor's appointments with
amazing
girlfriends who are single.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I'm sure it's really appreciated. I mean, it sounds small, and I'm sure it didn't take up a huge part of your day or anything. But it went a long way. So just be thinking a little bit of how can I treat this person as if almost like they were married. I guess if I was married to them, what's a romantic, quote unquote, gesture I could do for them? I could pick them from the airport. I could, watch their pet. I could take them to this doctor's appointment I know they're nervous about.
The thing I always find myself wanting to do is to say, there's this one societal narrative that this is the only way to be happy. And I kind of want to persuade people that there are all of these different paths to happy lives. But I'm sitting here in my like heteronormative marriage. So is it helpful for me to try to point out, like, you don't need a partner to be happy? Can we look at other ways to be happy? Or is that just like deeply annoying?
I mean, it depends who you're talking to. No, I think it's good because I think it signals to people in your life that you love them and you will support them in whatever connection they find. I think a diversity connection, as we know, is just so important. I'm just pro like people taking a beat to be like, what do I actually want? And then moving forward. But yeah, I think as soon as you're like, as if anyone's like, hey, you have to do this, it does feel constricting. And I think if you're signaling to people like, this is what I picked, I feel good, I feel happy, this is what works for me, but like, whatever, I'm so proud that you are having this kid on your own, right? Or you have, you left that partner that was not right for you. I think that's still like really meaningful and validating. You don't have to like, we all can't like live every different type of life, right?
But
model it.
We sometimes just don't even acknowledge that there's other lives. Like my big thing with this episode, with so many conversations that I have, is to put different types of lives out there as like, this is not something that I'm enduring while I wait to find a partner.
Exactly.
This is something that is enjoyable unto itself. It's why your book spoke to me so much. So I think that you can say that, but people are still like, okay, that's cool, but like, I really want a partner. And I'm like, no, but like, that's brought into you from outside messaging. Like, how do we unpack that and say, what does a good life look like? Because I also know so many people, going back to the stats, I think that when I was looking into the stats around people who were in happy marriages or unhappy marriages, that's also really hard to suss out. But it looked like around 50%, which correlates with the divorce rate. And there's so many people in unhappy marriages who settle and pick that path and make their lives significantly worse because they're so afraid of being single.
Exactly. So that's why I'm so passionate about getting this message out, no matter what your relationship status is because I think once we destigmatize singleness, it helps everybody. Because then, look, there's a lot of reasons why people don't leave marriages. I know it's very complicated and hard and often expensive, but if we could live in a world where people felt like they could leave a marriage because it felt right to just exit that relationship, not worrying about, oh God, I'm going to be single again, I feel like it would open up people to live more authentically. And then also, if you're in that relationship still, having that mindset that singleness isn't bad or something to be solved or to be fearful of, it helps people who are in relationships just retain their own personhood as well, which just makes you, I think, happier, right? To be engaged in your own hobbies, have your own interests, come as a full person to your partner rather than a you complete me situation. So I really do think this message, it just helps show that there's all different types of way of being, and it just makes you feel more like a full person.
You mentioned earlier that this ideal of a marriage that we often put up on a pedestal of society was just a blip in the 1950s, a result of World War II. Are there any other myths about marriage?
Another myth that I think people think about a lot is that marriage is going to make them just happier on the long term overall. And I know we talked about the data can be mixed on that, but a lot of people, I think, confuse a marriage with a wedding sometimes. The wedding is kind of like that spike of happiness, I think, for a lot of people. And so there's this idea of the hedonic treadmill, hedonic adaptation, basically saying when you are thinking that something's going to make you really happy, be it a marriage, a job, moving somewhere, all these things might lead to longer happiness depending on who you are and your situation. But research shows that most times it leads to a spike of happiness that's very temporary. And then you kind of basically go back down to like your happiness set point. So I think that people have this idea that like once you get married, it's like an adult coronation and you are like set for life. And, people talk about the relationship escalator, right? You meet someone, you move in, you get married, you have kids, but no one really talks about like what happens at the very top of the elevator after that or escalator after that. I think what people need to remember is like, you might be more obsessed with getting a wedding than you are a marriage. So think about what that would actually mean. And happiness is also not a destination. It's a feeling, and feelings are temporary. they arc and they dip and then they come back up again, right? And so I think this idea that like marriage is going to like make you 100% happier all the time. I mean, that's unrealistic to say about anything.
Well, and it makes me think about the Oscar syndrome or the Olympic medal syndrome, where when people accomplish these things that they've put up on a pedestal their entire lives, they're actually more sad afterward, because before they could tell themselves, when I get the Oscar, when I get all this money, when I get married, I'll finally be happy. And then when that doesn't prove true, they're like, well, what do I even go for? Like, what's my motivation now?
Yeah. It's so because it's so temporary, that moment. The event is more temporary, and then there's so much life in between those things. This framework that I learned from Dr. Pooja Lakshman, who wrote Real Self-Care, she has this idea of like goals versus values. And she's like, getting an Oscar, getting married, these are goals. Winning the Olympic medal, that's a goal. And you're automatically going to get that goal or you're not. But if you're thinking about, okay, what are my values under that goal? Like, why do I actually want that? You can start to see there's a lot more flexibility about how to express those values. So if you're like, okay, I want to get married. Okay, well, why? Well, I value security or stability, or I value community and connection and being in interdependentness. It's like, okay, well, once you see those values on the table, there's a lot of other ways you can get to those values in your life rather than this one thing, right? So then it becomes more flexible. And I think that's just a kinder, easier way to then build up your life in a more sustainable way rather than betting it all on black.
Well, and then you can seek after those values instead of just the one goal, which gets you into the harmonious
passion. Yeah, exactly.
That gets you more into the harmonious passion because you're just trying to all these different ways to achieve these values instead of being focused on this one obsessive thing.
Yeah, exactly.
We started off the podcast sort of talking about the stories we're told, and you're like the princess and the fairy tale and all of that. And it's interesting because we're being told a whole different set of stories that we've never been told before societally, which is via social media. We're watching so many people live out their lives. And I've noticed this interesting phenomenon happening on social media where even though I believe the research still shows people are getting, like, it's been a continuous curve of people getting married later and later and later. I think it's 28 on average.
Yeah, it's roughly that now.
Okay. But on social media, there is this glamorizing of young women who have all of these babies, these beautiful lives, and these, in a lot of ways, are the people that we're elevating as these superstar influencers. And I'm curious, one, if you've seen that trend and what you think about it, and two, what you think, I don't know, being exposed to these types of stories instead of the Disney princess stories, like what is the impact of social media on how we approach relationships, how we approach being single, how we think about what a good life looks like?
Yeah, I have seen those influencers. I also wonder, it's like, it kind of comes back to this idea about partnership as an economic gain, because I'm guessing a lot of these influencers are getting brand deals, right? As a result. And like there is money to be made as a result of glamorizing your young married motherhood, right? It kind of comes back to this idea that marriage can be like an economic haven at times for people.
Wait, that's so interesting. It's interesting because social media tends to, like the algorithms have literally been shown, like if you are stereotypically attractive, if you are young, if you have blonde hair, the algorithms literally favor you. They're incredibly racist algorithms by and large. And so if we're favoring that, and then those are people who are... It's almost like if you're a hot young mom, you're going to be more favored by the algorithm, and then the culture will elevate that concept as a result of that. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah, because then it glamorizes and makes it feel like you have to not just be married, but also like have a perfect face of makeup on and like make the cereal from scratch, right?
Yeah.
To then be like a good or happy mom. And that just feels the comparison and despair kind of cycle just like picks up even more. I mean, there's always been a kind of, keeping up with the Joneses when it comes to marriage or the status that marriage has. It does seem like it's putting it even on this like higher tippy top pedestal that's like even farther away and creating more of like a gap.
And what I'm seeing is I feel like in my generation, I'm 38, I had more and more friends who were like getting married later and all of that. And now I have friends in their like late 20s who feel behind already, who are like, I should already be married, have these cute kids, have this beautiful home, this beautiful life, because those are the people that they're seeing online.
Right.
Yeah.
But then like, is your next question like, but do you actually want that? Like, it's like, we get so used to seeing now with social media a variety of different lives, which is wonderful. And like, I feel like I've learned so much as a result of social media and like learning about different people's lives. It's the new way of tricking you into thinking about what you want.
So do you think awareness is the way that we combat that?
Yeah, it's like, I mean, not to sound like a broken record about mindfulness, but really pausing and being like, what am I noticing about like how my body's reacting and to seeing this? Is this actually something that would feel like nourishing my life, depleting in my life? Like what stories am I like feeding in to support this idea that getting married super young is the right way for everybody? So yeah, awareness, it's the name it to tame it thing, right? It's like understanding this is what's being pushed. Do I actually want it? And you might really still want it. And that's okay for some people, right? But yeah, taking that beat and being like, is this a message I'm hearing? Is this a voice that is genuinely and authentically coming from inside me, or is it coming from outside of me?
I also love the puja trick, which we have an episode with her. I will link it in the show notes. She's phenomenal. But I love that in that moment of being like, what are the values that this is highlighting in me, and trying to be a detective essentially and get really, really specific. Like, do I want comfort? Do I want companionship? Do I want to be surrounded by beautiful things, which is a value? Yeah. I interviewed Professor Susie Welch, and she talked about how wanting to be in a beautiful life surrounded by beautiful things is a real value. And often we dismiss it as like petty or shallow or whatever, but maybe that's what you want. And then can we figure out alternative ways to get that?
Exactly.
Let's talk about the perception thing, because you did mention wanting to be seen a certain way and wanting to be perceived as successful or desirable or all of these things plays into this conversation in a big way. And I think about a lot. There was an interview with Trevor Noah, and he was talking about how even though he's so successful, he's super famous, he's very financially successful, all of these things, people in the world at large often are like, what's wrong with this guy? Because he's not married. Like there must be something intrinsically, deeply wrong with him because another human being hasn't chosen this person and said like, you are the one. How do we move away from that on a societal level? And also what can we do about that on an individual level?
Yeah, I'll start with the individual because obviously that's what we can mostly control, right? Is like, I think for me, when you are hearing that stuff, kind of remembering that says way more about the person saying that than anything about your situation, right? It's like when I hear someone be like, oh God, yeah, like what's wrong with them? Like I think on an individual level, it is questioning like, okay, why am I so interested in this? Like married people and partnered people have this perceived privacy that single people are not as afforded, where we do think like, well, like what's going on in your dating life? Like we're like getting like really, graphic stories about people's sex lives because they're single. And like, because we just assume it's like, well, you're not married. It's not like, you're not in this like private union. Show me what you got. Like lay it out all on the table. So even just, acknowledging that like, single people have a right to privacy as well too. I mean, putting Trevor Noah aside, but like there might be a reason, quote unquote, a reason why someone might not be having the relationship they want, right? There could be very real things they're working through. But yeah, there is this like question of like, how do we fix this person or what is really going on there? I mean, that's human interest. I think there's nothing inherently wrong with saying like, oh, I wonder why they don't have a partner right now or they're not dating anyone. But then when it becomes like the only thing you focus on about another person, I think that's the time to stop and say like, why am I so obsessed with this? What about my relationships? How do I view partnership? And how is it affecting how I think of other people's worth? It's this idea, it's called amatonormativity that comes from this philosopher, Elizabeth Brake at Rice University. This idea that we are also conditioned to make romantic connections the only important type of relationship, that it discounts friendships, mentorship, all the different types of connections like we've talked about that make up a healthy life. And it's this default. And, she talks about this idea that when you meet someone and you say, oh, like you're married, like, do you have a family? Like, we don't mean like, do you have a mom and a dad, an aunt and a sister? We mean, do you have kids? It's a really narrow way of being like, this is how you fit into this box and this is how I need to put you in, like, okay, you're one of them now. Like you are, but like everyone has a family.
It's like almost a categorization thing.
Exactly.
So like with Trevor Noah, the reason for the judgment could be because we are not able to categorize him neatly, and that drives us nuts.
Yeah, exactly. Your brain loves a complete sentence. And so it's like, well, he has everything going for him. Why isn't it why isn't it clicked in? But the reality is like, there's a lot of reasons why people aren't dating or just not in a relationship now. And all these like myths of why people are single, right? Like they're too picky, they're too strong-headed, or they won't like, they're too intimidating rather. All these ideas that we throw at single people about why they might not be in a relationship. I think it's helpful to invert that and be like, maybe the reason they're single is actually for some really good reasons, that they're either picking themselves or, not settling for something that would be not what they deserve, right? There's like, if we could just invert all these like harmful ways that we talk about single people, pushing them into partnerships that maybe are not for them or really not for them, be like, oh, maybe you're single because you're making some really good, healthy choices for yourself.
I have a girlfriend who I think she's like the best single person that I know. She's living this phenomenal life. And she said a quote to me and I wrote it down because I thought it was so interesting. She said, "No woman is single in her 30s for any reason other than she values and loves herself, because she could easily not be single if she were willing to settle." Framing being single as like, that's because I value myself. That's because I
100%.
love myself. I could go out there and just find somebody. Like there's a lot of people out there to choose from, and many people do choose to settle.
Yeah, like you're saying, it's very easy to find someone. Like if you have no standards and you are happy with anything and you will put up with anything. I think that's where that frustration comes in for a lot of people of like, I'm high value, I have a lot to offer, but I'm not feeling that back right now. And that's frustrating, right? Because people want connection. So if you are in that situation thinking about like, oh, actually picking my solitude and a full life that is not threatened by someone like, kind of flipping the proverbial table on me all the time or catching me off guard and making my life worse is really, I think it's really wonderful. I mean, like it's a common thing I hear on social media a lot, but with heterosexual relationships is that men are not the competition for each other when they are dating a woman. They're competing against a woman's solitude, which I think is an incredible way to think about it now.
Oh, that's interesting. So almost the more comfortable you get with your solitude, the more of a high quality partner you'll get. Because you won't be settling in that way.
Exactly. I see it happen, yeah.
What are your best tips for becoming comfortable with our solitude?
Oh, okay. So I love this tool it's from dialectical behavior therapy. It's called the ABCs. And it's basically about how you can build up like positive emotion. A is accumulating positives. B is building mastery. And then C is coping ahead. And all of these are small, like everyday things you can do to just kind of build up your like positivity reserves. So accumulating positives, it's as easy as it sounds. It's noticing the good things in life, even when they're really small. It's this idea also of like savoring that's really important in the concept of resilience. So you got to see a friend that you normally don't and had a really nice conversation with them, like savoring that, accumulating that positive. It doesn't have to be like material, but like, if you're like every Friday I get this one special latte from my favorite coffee shop, like that kind of thing. Or it could be as simple as I saw my dog go up to another cute dog on the street. And wasn't that like a special moment? So just noticing things that are positive in your life, even if they are like dead simple. Building mastery, kind of similar, but it's really more of that feeling of I feel like I'm accomplishing something or I'm like moving. I just feel good doing something. Could be as simple as, I paid that bill that I've been putting off for like a few weeks. I love like crafting. I got really into sewing in the last few years. And I'm not like amazing at it, but like I was like, oh, I can read a sewing pattern. Like I've built this skill up now that I didn't have a year plus ago. I can make a full dress from scratch. Like that feels good. And then there's C, coping ahead. So it's kind of like a mental rehearsal. It's not necessarily practicing exactly what you're going to say in a situation, but it's more like just gaining confidence about how you're going to move through it. So let's say you are always frustrated when you go to family functions and you have this one family member that's always on your case about dating. It's not about saying like, hey, Aunt Linda, like back off. I mean, you can, but it's more about like imagining yourself just like nailing it, almost like a silent movie. You're like, I handled that with poise and ease, and just like mentally rehearsing that like feeling is kind of like building up your confidence to be like, I can do this. So accumulating positives, building mastery, coping ahead. It's this really lovely tool that you can do even if you're not single, right? To feel good about building up this like positivity in your everyday life so that when negative things do happen, you can kind of, it's easier to have it slide off your back or to regulate when they're thrown your way rather than like kind of fall apart at the seams.
It's interesting because I think there are a lot of really difficult things about being coupled that people don't talk about.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a choose your heart and you should be really comparing likes to likes. I think sometimes we compare the rosiest view of a relationship to the hardest view of being single. And we're like, well, I want the rosiest view. And we don't think about all of the unique challenges that come with a relationship. And there are some very real and unique challenges to being single, both financially, pragmatically, like moving by yourself is so hard. Everything's so expensive, all these things. So can you talk to some of those challenges? And can you also tell us maybe some strategies to deal with them?
Specifically about the finance stuff or
of
just
any of
getting help?
the real challenges of being single. Like there are the singles tax, that's a real thing. And so it's both like I want to zoom out and say, and there's real challenges of being partnered, but so that people aren't just like, okay, well, the solution is to get a partner.
Right.
But I also don't want to not address the real challenges of being single.
Totally, absolutely. The daily life stuff, I think, is the thing that can really wear and tear on single people. Like we're talking about, like paying a lot more for housing. Just like if you have to get groceries, you are the person who has to get groceries. Like no one else is going to help with that. I would say knowing like what is the things that come easy to you and like appreciate that comes easy. Like cooking, for instance, for me, like never bothers me to cook. I love doing it. It's very nourishing for me. But for some people, like that is taxing. So thinking about like what's like the depleting task and like how can you thoughtfully bring in other people from your life? Now, obviously, like it'd be great if someone came over every single night, would cook with you, a partnership. But maybe it's not that far-fetched. Like maybe you become friends with people in your neighborhood and it's like, we're just going to make a really simple dinner every Sunday night. And like, so you have a little bit of leftovers or something. Like think of creative ways to make the care and of your life a little bit more enjoyable. And I always feel like the answer is to like invite more people in. And it doesn't have to be someone who's super close. Like I used to live in this neighborhood in DC where we had a lot of dogs in our building. And my next door neighbors were really kind. They were a married couple. And they would always offer to watch my dog because they were obsessed with her. They also love dachshunds. So that was a nice connection point. So I was like, oh, amazing. And then that gave me the courage to then when a dog on the street really liked my dog, I was like, can I get your number? You also live nearby. You live alone. She wasn't single, but she lived alone. And so we would trade dog care all the time. So like, see how other people are modeling kindness towards you if that's happening, and then see how you can do it to other people because it's kind of this beautiful virtuous circle that can happen. What you put out there can come back to you as well. So I would say like, yeah, getting really creative about ways you can make the tasks that you really dread a little bit easier, a little bit more enjoyable by either bringing more people in. If you have the financial means, obviously, throw the money at it. If you don't, like we're saying, being singles can be really expensive. So thinking about, this is my life kit brain coming on, but like, the biggest part of your budget is sometimes the way to make the biggest changes rather than like looking at all your subscriptions and things like that, all the tiny things, being like, do I actually want a roommate, right? Like, I think we do have a lot, especially in America, you seem more successful if you like have your own place, live on your own or live with a partner, right? Like maybe a lot of these things could be solved by living with a friend that you really love, right? Or like joining a community that's a lot more communal. Like that could then also solve a lot of the things that feel taxing to you as well. So there's like the very practical things in singleness that, you're right, just doesn't get talked about enough because it feels like it's like you're kind of toiling away in this privacy, right, of like, your to-do list. But other people, you would be surprised, are more willing to help you than you think.
Yeah, and I do think we need to talk about it because otherwise people just feel like they're suffering by themselves.
Yeah, we see this all the time with childcare. People feel like this is like the only way I can ever get someone to help me with a kid is to be like a direct partner, family member, or I pay them. And the reality is there can be flexibility if you're creative about it.
Do you think that single people should be actively seeking out other single friends?
Oh, yeah, I'm a huge proponent of that. I think that it's really beneficial to seek out connection from people who are going through similar life stages as you, right? Marissa Franco, I know you've had on the show, who wrote the wonderful book Platonic about friendship. She talked to me about this idea of transitioners, like looking for other people who are going through similar like life stages and life transitions as you, because they're often the people who are more open to friendship.
So like when you move to a new city, look for other people who move to that city.
Exactly. Other people who just got a new job, other people who are going through a divorce, right? It's kind of like wandering through a maze where you feel like you're the only person in there, and then you turn the corner and you're like, oh my God, thank God you're here. You run into someone, right? It's like a relief because I love talking to, my best friend about a topic, but she might not always know she can empathize and be really supportive. And she has been, but there's times where you're just like, well, you really want to talk to someone who's in the thick of it with you, right? But also be prepared for that to change. I think that's another kind of grief that can happen with a lot of single people is that they have a single partner or a single friend, right? And then that person meets someone and what the internet says is going to boyfriend island, right? You never see them again. You're like, oh, wait, that person actually was just kind of thought this was a waiting room. So finding people who will stick with you for these life moments and, seeing that friendship can be for seasons as well, right? I think that singles should always seek out other single people to feel also kind of a safe space with, right? Where they don't feel like anyone's asking them questions about dating life that they don't want to hear, anything like that. But yeah, we all want to feel seen. For instance, my father died over 20 years ago now, or almost 20 years ago now. And every time I meet people now or a friend is going through a death of a parent, I write them a letter, a handwritten letter now to be like, you're part of this unfortunate club. I see you. Maybe you didn't know this about me, but here's my story. Here's what I found helpful. And it's just a way to be like, we get each other. And that is always so powerful, I think.
Where are we finding all these cool single friends?
I mean, keep your eyes open, right? I'm definitely an anomaly, I think. I love making friends. I feel like I will show up to a wedding alone and come home with 3 new friends.
It almost occurs to me, and if we're all these different life paths are valid options, you could ask your friends instead of being like, oh, do you know any great partners to set me up with?
You could be like,
do you know any good friends to set me up?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you kind of can treat it almost like platonic dating. I mean, the other thing too is just be the starter, right? I think that's very powerful as well, where I've never been invited to a party or a coffee date or anything like that from a platonic connection and never been gross. Why are they inviting me? I'm immediately flattered, right? And so I think a lot of people resist making that overture to a new friend because they're like, they just assume too much what they think this person is going to do or think of them. But people are thrilled when you invite them. And I think just kind of always trying, right? Being like, hey, you mentioned, if this is someone at work, you mentioned you really like that movie. I'm having another friend over to watch that same director do this other film that we love. If you want to come over. Again, I love cooking. I'm like, I have extra food. Do you want to come over? We're all going to this thing. Just always put it out there because you never know what's going to come back. And yeah, maybe it's a short-term connection, a friendship, but then you'll be surprised what you find. For instance, I write about this in the book. A few summers ago, I was at a DC public pool and I saw someone who I've known for years at work, but we were never super close. And I saw her in the pool and I was had my book and I was like, I could just read my book and not talk to her, right? But I was like, actually, I'm going to literally wade into the waters here and make a bid for connection. And I was like, hey, how are you? I was like, how's your boyfriend? And she's like, oh, we broke up, a month ago. And I was like, oh, perfect. This is another single person I can hang with now. And I invited her to concerts and we would go to the pool all summer together. And it just became a really perfect friendship just because I thought, hey, what's the worst that could happen? I'm just going to say hi and connect.
I'd love to talk about the particular type of grief that comes from having a friend and then having them get into a relationship and essentially disappear from your life. How do we deal with that? And how do we not be the type of person who does that?
Yes. So another dialectical behavioral therapy tool I love is radical acceptance. It's essentially noticing when you are feeling resistance against something. It's not to say don't be sad, move on. It's to kind of reset and notice what reality is actually happening in front of you and then making a choice. So the way that you practice it is when you're noticing a big resistance to a feeling, you're like, man, I'm so annoyed that this friend has really ditched me, and you're kind of fuming and you're feeling all the gears of rumination turning, is to pause, be like, I'm noticing that I'm resisting. How do I feel in my body? And how can I remind myself this is exactly how things are right now? And it's, again, not to accept a harmful or abusive situation. It's just to acknowledge what is your reality right now. Take a beat and kind of also give your body and your head a moment to kind of come down to earth and ground and then make a choice. Now, the hard thing in that situation is you either have to have a tough conversation with that friend, which more people should have, be like, hey, I really miss hanging out with you. I noticed that, you're making less time for our friendship when, you started dating so-and-so. Could we meet up a little bit more regularly? Or could we just text more regularly or something and see what happens? Or the other thing is like maybe you let that person go off and kind of wait for them to come back to you. That's hard, I know. But then turning to, again, being like, what other connections are in my life that I can nurture? Now, how do you not be that person, right? I honestly think it is about remembering your own personhood within a relationship and not have the default be, well, I'm just going to, do everything with my partner. Every social situation is going to be with my partner. Coming together, with them is, really can be really beautiful and wonderful. And like you're with them for a reason, hopefully, right? But making sure you think about the connections in your life that you had before you were in that relationship and being intentional, reaching out, nurturing them, making sure you see them on their own, bringing them into your life. Again, like it's kind of the rules we were talking about earlier about how married people can and partner people can, support their single friends is like remembering your own hobbies and your own interests and experiencing yourself in a relationship outside of that relationship too. And then bringing in your friend and trying to, things won't be exactly the same, right? Like you'll be going through a different, life stage. Maybe you're moving in with them. Maybe you're getting married, but not have that be the only type of conversation you have. Because so often we have these friendships now where we're just like recounting what we did since the last time we saw them. And I know you're big about this, creating novelty, making memories with friends again, focusing a friendship on that, as well as being supportive and being there for them, I think is going to feel beneficial to both people in that situation.
Do you think as it becomes more and more possible to be single from financial components, all of that, and more enjoyable to be single, that people are going to get too picky and never kind of end up in relationships? Like, do you see negative societal drawbacks to this changed framework?
I really don't. I don't think that society benefits from people not doing things that feel authentic to them. And when you feel more like yourself and not resisting something, like being in a relationship you don't want to be in or dating when you don't want to date, you can feel just so much more at ease. And I do think I would love to see as more people kind of think about this idea that they do become more selective about who they actually want to give their time to and their energy to. And I think benefiting from your own solitude and honoring your own partnership makes you productive in these ways that feel, I think, that just lead to like a fuller life. Maybe not necessarily, making more money. For some people it is like, I really want to focus on my business or what have you. But maybe you just see, oh, I was so focused on dating or investing in this person I didn't really care for, but I thought I should be caring for. And I didn't realize that I actually really love this really enriching hobby, or I was not writing as much, or I wasn't as involved with my own family as much as I wanted to be. I think it's just going to help people see more all the different types of lives that they can lead and different values that they can express on the daily. And maybe be a little bit more selective, but I think that's kind of radical and cool.
There's another idea that you talked about, which was instead of thinking about living life linearly, we should think about living life. It was getting wider and deeper, I think. And I really love that framework. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah. I had this epiphany a few years ago that I could have two potential lives, right? Like I could either be mostly single for a lot of the rest of my life, or I might meet someone. It might be in 5 years. It might be in 20 years. Who knows? But I was like, I have to be ready for both of those realities to be as amazing as they can be. Because right now I am so focused on life looking like this linear line from I got the college degree, I got the good job, I got the apartment, I got the dog. Now I need the husband and the kid, right? Like just like the one to one to one. And instead I was like, oh, what if I was actually preparing for any type of life I could possibly have, but making it really wide and deep and really invest in friendships and my community and my family's life and my hobbies and just be really continually curious about the world and really shrink the part of me that feels really bad that I don't have a partner and to be solely focused on dating because dating was just taking so much of my energy and my emotional headspace that I still had all these other things in my life, but I wasn't noticing how wonderful they really were. It wasn't until a few years ago, I was like, wow, this is actually a really special time in my life, and I've been kind of taking it for granted for a long time because I was so narrow track focused on how it was supposed to go. But the more good you add into your life, the bigger your life feels. It doesn't have to be the super big life events that's nice and driving toward those things, but just enjoying a fleeting warm summer or that's not humid day in DC where I live with my friends, like having a laugh, watching my dog, like, just be super cute on my roof while I read a book and enjoy that time. There's so much more joy that you can find if you just kind of lift your head up.
What would you say to people who listen to this podcast or read your book and are like, that's all fine, but like if she could be in a relationship, she definitely would be. Like this is all just her trying to comfort herself for the life she's been handed. What would you say to them?
Well, I would say that a funny thing happened on the way to me writing this book was then I sold the book, I wrote it, and then as I was writing it, I actually did get into a long-term partnership. Yeah. So I actually say that like the book itself was kind of like, I joke it's my capstone in a way on singleness. But the more I was like getting in deep into the book and then also into this relationship that became very serious, I was like, oh, I still need all of these skills. Like these are still super important for a very full life because I love my partner deeply. He can't process my emotions for me. He can't get inside my head and talk me down from a ruminative state. He can be really supportive, and he is, but I also want to make sure that I have hobbies and things that, again, that deep, wide life. And we're both very intentional about making sure that we bring in our single friends into our life, that we support them, that we help them out, that we have friends outside of each other. And I feel like my life has become better for it. This idea that, most research is me search. And so, yeah, I did want to like kind of crack why it was feeling so hard for me because I knew in my head it was wonderful and valid to be single. And I felt that a lot of the time, too. I don't want to make it sound like it was all doom and gloom. But I was like, how do I bridge my head and my heart that are having this disconnect? Once I was able to like really put it into paper, into words about all these skills that are actually like super helpful for how I got through singleness, I was like, oh, now that I'm in the first real long-term relationship of my life, I was like, oh, wow, everyone needs this. So yes, I totally hear the potential criticism or pushback of, oh, she's just trying to make herself feel better until she gets a partnership. But I also, know now that a good partnership, a lot of the basics come easy, right? But like staying really intentional about being community focused, even in a relationship, that takes energy and attention. And so I'm really grateful that I was able to dig really deep into this research in this one very substantial part of my life as I was going through this transition. Because again, I just want to like shout it from the rooftops, like destigmatizing singleness is something that benefits everybody.
Yeah, that's my core takeaway is one, I completely agree with you. I think that the tools that are in your book that are around embracing singleness are so important for every single person on the planet. And if we destigmatize singleness, it gives people in relationships options. I just think about, I have so many friends who are in relationships making them deeply unhappy, but because they think the worst thing in the world is being single, they won't leave them. And I do think that giving people those options, giving people that agency and power back is so, so important.
Yeah. And feeling agency feels good, right?
Yeah. No, it's one of the like core things that makes us feel good
exactly,
in our lives.
Yeah. So it just makes perfect sense to me, but I know everyone has to find their own path to it.
Yeah.
So I'm happy for my book to be that resource, hopefully.
Can you give us one homework assignment along those lines? Maybe it's not for single people directly, but for embracing the qualities, the beneficial qualities of singleness, regardless of our romantic state?
Yeah. I think finding like your solitude style is really helpful. It's something that I talk about in the book where there's this difference between feeling alone versus lonely. Like loneliness is when you're having an active dissatisfaction with being alone, and it's very harmful, as we know from all the research. But alone is just you happen to be alone, right? Like you don't feel negative about it. And solitude is a state of recharge, and it's a very positive emotion and state to be in. So I think understanding that when you feel lonely, it's not that you're bad or like your life is in shambles or anything like that. It's your body trying to tell you, hey, you need to seek out social connection. So being in tune with that and then going into seeking out connection, like texting a friend, calling someone, scheduling something that you know is going to uplift you, I think destigmatizes then the shame that can come around loneliness and getting what you need and kind of making it almost like a biological signal akin to like hunger or thirst, right? To make you just be like, oh, this is just something my body needs. And then on the flip side of that, like enjoying and practicing a solitude, like a solitude style could be that you're working on a creative project, right? Like I love movies. And so in the pandemic, I was spending a lot of time at home with my dog, just watching movies. But I was like, I'm going to watch trilogies. And so I got really into a lot of trilogies. And then when I was sitting 6 feet apart in a park with someone, I'd be like, hey, I'm doing this project. I'm talking, and I would, it would engage me and bring people in. So it was fun to use my solitude style to then like, when I was with people or having connection, yeah, it fueled like more conversation and things like that. Or like, I'm a big fan of the idea of the artist way, right? This idea of like doing morning pages or this idea of taking yourself on an artist date, just putting new input into your brain, like going to a thrift shop and just kind of seeing what kind of kooky things are there that you might want to, that might inspire you for your art, or taking yourself out to a museum. There's actually research shows that we actually enjoy museums, art museums more when we're on our own than when we go with other people. Interestingly enough.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's because there's less social performance of being
You're
like,
not
oh,
like,
yes,
oh,
Monet. Yeah. I know all about him. And I can tell you all the art history facts I know. But then also I think you can use solitude, again, as a way to prep for social time, like things like loving kindness meditation, like which is a way to, think about sending love to people. It makes you feel more connected and part of a bigger whole, but you're still sitting alone doing that, right? Or just like, if you have a really hard time with solitude, engaging your hands, like gardening, sewing, crocheting, cooking, like these are all things that we don't necessarily think of as being alone time all the time, but people are doing things alone or in solitude all the time. But when there's a social like expectation that you should be doing with someone else, that's when we kind of get freaked out and we're like, oh shoot, like I should do something else. Try to find your solitude style, even if it's like for really small bouts. You see how it is restorative and nourishing is my biggest piece of advice, because I think just being able to sit with yourself is a real beautiful practice. And I think that's where a lot of life and awakenings about yourself can also happen. And these kinds of moments where you're not being obsessed with who you're trying to date or like, oh God, like I have to make the grocery list before my partner goes out or whatever. Like sitting with yourself and just kind of yourself be kind of opens you up to all this beautiful poetic parts of life and imagination.
The thing I want to tease out that I love that you did is you took an activity that's pretty benign, like watching movies, and you kind of, the difference between I'm just doing this thing and I'm like kind of making it a project or a hobby is so tiny, but sometimes we won't take that step. It's like, I love cooking. I'm going to cook my way through this cookbook.
Exactly.
I love movies. I'm going to dive into trilogies and have this thing to talk about. And I do think it's such an unlock, and I encourage people to look for that thing that they can take something they're already doing and just like tip it a little bit over until it becomes something that's a bit more intentional.
Yeah, totally. And then it can also bring in some of like that novelty, right? Where if you're like, I'm going to cook my way through this cookbook, maybe you find a recipe or a technique that you never would have otherwise. And you're just kind of like building to this bigger life again. It's more fun just to be like, I'm doing a project.
I'm doing a project, yeah.
Rather than like, I'm just
You don't feel like you're
Netflix.
wasting time. You feel like you're using time, which I think is really different.
Totally.
Can you tell us a little bit in your own words about your wonderful book?
Sure. So Party of One, Be Your Own Best Life Partner is basically a self-help book about how we all can think about our relationship with ourselves, which is the longest relationship we're ever going to have. So it starts with, demystifying a lot of myths about love and relationships and marriage, but also the really internal skills of how can we talk to ourselves better? How can we regulate our emotions? And then looking outward about how do you actually like build a life that's value-based, that you actually want to live, and how do you bring more people into it? So it's really a way to say, hey, it's your party. How are you going to design it?
Love it. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. I love this.
Oh, good. Thank you, Liz. I really appreciate it.
There are 2 things you can do right now that make a huge difference in the success of the show, and they are both free. First, follow the podcast on Spotify or Apple or YouTube or wherever you are watching or listening. Even if you think you are following already, check that button on the podcast homepage, the one that lists all of the episodes, the one that says following. Next, second thing, send a link to this episode to one person whom you think would benefit from it, a single friend, a coupled friend, somebody that you just want to have this conversation with. These two things help the podcast grow and make sure that we can continue to produce amazing episodes for you. We are also able to keep this show totally free thanks to the amazing brand partners that you heard about in this episode. You can support the podcast and save money by using the discount codes that we share. There's a full list of them at lizmoody.com/codes. And if you want practical takeaways from today's episode, head over to lizmoody.substack.com. You will get exclusive content like challenges, meal plans, bonus expert interviews. We recently just shared our monthly favorites. Those were things that my whole team bought or listened to or learned that changed our lives. And there's some really fun ideas in there. So definitely check it out. And of course, come hang out with me on Instagram. I'm at Liz Moody. I share tons of behind the scenes of my life. I share the ways that I'm using the tools that we learn about in these episodes in my real life. And I share a lot of vulnerable, intimate content. So come hang out there. That's at Liz Moody. All right. I love you. I am so honored that you chose to spend this time with me today. I know that you could be listening to thousands of podcasts out there, and it is never lost on me that you choose to listen to this podcast. I appreciate you, and I will see you on the next episode of the Liz Moody Podcast. Oh, just one more thing. It's the legal language. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. It is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a physician, a psychotherapist, or any other qualified professional.